It's Goose, and today I'm going to go over this Strandberg Boden NX. So this is a 6-string Strandberg multi-scale bolt-on. It is a headless guitar with a lot of really interesting quirks about it. Unlike this guitar, especially for the looks, I think it looks really cool. It looks kind of like a Korok. It looks like a Korok from Legend of Zelda. I don't know if anyone else is a Zelda fan out here. It's got all the sort of specs you would expect from a high-end guitar. And it has a lot of really interesting design features as well. So let's get into it. It's quite an interesting guitar. So the first thing I want to get into is the neck. So we have a fairly mild fan fret going from 25.5-inch scale on the bass side to 25-inch scale on the treble side. I think for most people up until about the 12th fret, you're not going to notice that there's a fan fret going on. When you get past the 12th fret, I start to notice it a lot. I like how it's more straight on this side in terms of where the straight fret is. It almost feels like the straight fret starts just at the first fret and there isn't like a fan backwards. I actually prefer that. This neck also has stainless steel frets. They are not the smoothest stainless steel actually. I don't know if it's the finishing on the frets or something from the factory, but they don't feel quite as smooth as the stainless steel that I've experienced from Kiesel or Balaguer. You have lumen-lay inlays on the frets, and also on the side you have these lumen lays as well. Although the weird thing is, starting from the 12th fret, you start seeing them not be as centered on the fret. And especially when you get to the higher frets, it almost looks like it's marking the fret before. So they're not quite as centered once you get to the higher frets. It almost looks like they were trying to center it for the 25-inch scale on this side. But the scale length being longer on this side makes the frets not, or makes the markers not center as much. On the headstock, or the lack of headstock, you have the truss rod right here, which is nice because it's easy access to the truss rod. And you have these locking nuts for the strings. The cool part is there's this slanted edge right here, and honestly, having the strings go through and then just clipping them with that slanted edge here actually does a lot to prevent the amount of marks that you could make onto the headstock area right here when you're trying to clip the strings. So that's a nice little feature. The most interesting thing I think about this neck is this endure neck sort of profile. So it basically has this thicker portion in the middle right here, and it moves along with my fingers right here towards the other side of the neck. So it starts from this side and it ends on this side. And what that's supposed to do is, as you're running your thumb along it, it's supposed to be better for your thumb as you get to the higher frets up here. Generally speaking, your thumb is going to be running on this side of the guitar. It's actually going to feel more like kind of like an Ibanez thinness up here. And then when you get down here, it's almost like actually kind of like a Les Paul in terms of thickness, because that material, if you can see right here, it looks like there's more material as you go towards this headstock right here. But it is actually not. It's just that piece that I was talking about running to the other side of the fretboard. Lastly, the thing I want to go over is this zero fret. I think a zero fret is a great idea, because if you have any issues with the nut, the frets will always be there and it won't have that kind of sitar-y sound just because the nut has been like slightly worn or something. So overall, my thoughts on the neck is that the endure neck didn't bother me as much because my thumb runs on the top of the neck right here instead of against the back of the neck. Like some folks I know do that. But because my thumb runs where it does, this actually hasn't bothered me too much. If your thumb does rest on the back of the neck, I would imagine that it might bother you a bit. But what really got me, and this is a personal preference thing, I know people who can play multi-scale very well, but I just cannot get used to it. Sometimes when there's certain picking patterns, I accidentally like go one fret further because of that fan. Hammer on at the end of the arpeggio, that part, I might accidentally do. I can accidentally make that mistake a lot because of just where my hand naturally flows with the fan frets. I know most people say that a fan fret guitar flows with your hand, but that hasn't been my experience, and I've always kind of felt weird because I just don't feel like it works for me. Comment down below if it works for you though. That's the only thing that really bugs me about this. I think that the headstock is super solid. I think it like holds tuning and doesn't slip or anything. It's never had an issue for me up here. I think the zero fret is a very good idea, and overall, just the feeling of the neck doesn't feel too bad. All right, now moving on to the body of this guitar. So you have this thin sort of flamed veneer on top. It's actually interesting how detailed it is for being a veneer. I can tell it's a veneer by looking into the pocket of the pickups right there. It's a matte finish. And so eventually over time, you will wear it down and it will look kind of weirdly half glossy. There are some areas where it feels rougher than other areas. So like right here on the lower horn for me, the paint doesn't feel quite as smooth over here. It feels like there's like little like dots of like, I guess the matte is just not as consistent over there. But it's like smoother over here. It's not as consistent as I would like. The back is completely matte black, and I really love the comfort carves on this. Actually, it feels effortless to get to the upper frets on this. The body carves are very comfortable. So since this is a headless guitar, you see that we have these headless tuners right here. There's a space underneath here for I don't know what, and the output jack is actually within that space here, so I guess it's for the space of that output jack. Presuming that if you had a strap, you could just have the cable wrap around the strap there. The bridge is angled for that multi-scale. There's a carve on this side for your picking arm, and it's pretty comfortable. And this is a double cut, so you're getting actually some really like deep cuts, and it just allows for a really good upper fret access. And my thoughts on the body. So the body is very light and it is mostly comfortable. However, I do have a few sort of thoughts about it. And the body is very small. Even though this corner right here does a good job of keeping the guitar between my legs, if you are the kind of person who plays in a classical position, it does feel really small and kind of takes a little bit of getting used to. If you play on your right leg though, when you're sitting, it feels like just fine. And when you're standing with the strap, it's super well balanced. This guitar only comes in at 4.5 pounds on my scales. I think it's like 4.6 pounds, and it's absolutely one of the most comfortable light guitars like you could hold in your hands. And so that's basically kind of my thoughts on like the overall like design of the guitar. So let's get into electronics. So we got two Strandberg branded pickups here, but I will say that they are high enough output for me. They just don't quite have the top end, I think. There's a little bit of harshness in the mids as well. And this is compared to my other guitars with different pickups, so it's hard to compare. I'm just giving you kind of like a reference point. So if you look at the pickups here, they are mounted straight versus the angle of the multi-scale. Because the bridge pickup is further away from this point where the bridge starts than like a conventional straight scale guitar, it actually sounds a lot warmer. It sounds like something in between a usual bridge pickup and a neck pickup. It's kind of still more bridge-like. It sounds fine for the higher strings, but some people might prefer the sound that comes out of that. And the location of the knobs is like out of the way, and I kind of like where it is because if you look at like where they are relative to where your hand would be, you're not going to run into them when you're playing. I think they are in a very, very good spot. All right, so let's talk about the pros and cons of this guitar. I think the pros are the tuning stability. Because this is a headless guitar, you don't really have a lot of extra like string here. And because of that 0 fret, you don't have to contend with like a nut being really like uncooperative. It does a very good job of keeping in tune because of all these factors. And I'll get to the adjustment of the bridge later, but once you get the bridge adjusted, I think that it's very solid, and I think it will be a perfect companion for either if you're performing or if you're recording in a studio. Upper fret access is amazing on this guitar. If you like multi-scale, I think this will fit you really well. It's not too crazy of a fan. I can still play perfectly fine on this, even if it's not my preference, and I think that most people would be completely fine with it as well. Neck shape is definitely a subjective one. It hasn't bothered me. If you're the kind of person whose thumb rests like this, it might bother you. I really like the detail on the flamed maple veneer, and you can see that right here. It actually is very well like matched too between this side and this side, which a lot of guitars don't have that match very well. And I actually really like these knobs. If you look, there's like an indent, right? Like a flat side of the knob. It's very nice and handy to know where your volume is. Compared to most other knobs I've used, I actually really like this design. You can just really feel like where the volume is while you're adjusting it. You don't have to look down or anything. All right, now on to the cons, because there are actually two specific things on this guitar that I think could be improved. And this is an entry-level Strandberg, so I don't know if the higher-end Strandbergs fix that, but it's more of a design thing than like a quality thing. So as mentioned earlier, this is where the output jack is, and it's not really an issue until you realize that the cable goes in this way, and when you turn the guitar around, the cable actually goes upward. So if you're sitting like I do, with the guitar in between my legs, this cable is actually in the way. It naturally goes there, and then if you want to try to put the cable down, you're going to be bending this a lot, and I don't know that that would make a lot of sense. And some cables will fail if you bend this side too much, so it really depends on what's more comfortable to you. And so you might be thinking, why not just put a right angle jack into the guitar like other guitars? So with this little bit right here, this little lip on the guitar body, I feel like if you put the right angle cable in, you're going to run the risk of potentially damaging or even just chipping off this right here. Like it runs into that, and it's just not a great height for a right angle cable. And while I think it does work better when you're sitting with it like this, I would not want to damage the body of this guitar, especially since it's over $1,000. So that's like actually kind of a big design flaw, I would say. I don't understand why the cable doesn't just come out through here. If you followed like the recent Kiesel A2 output cable situation, that's kind of the similar thing here. I think they should just make the cable output here. And yeah, it might look uglier than if it was here from the front. But if you're sitting with this guitar between your legs like I do, this is a terrible spot to be putting it. And then the second thing I want to mention is how you adjust the intonation of the bridge, the individual bridge saddles. So these individual bridge saddles, if you look closely, underneath these strings, you can see there's a screw in there. And so on most guitars, you can actually like loosen a screw and move the saddle up and down with the string attached. For this, you absolutely need to remove the string completely and get at that screw that's underneath this string right here. It takes a very long time, especially if you're adjusting it, then you lock it, and then you put your string back on and you find out that it's still not perfect. It is something that makes intonation just take way longer than it needs to. And while this guitar came in E standard when I got it from the factory, I've since put it in C standard. It needed some intonation adjustment for that. And really, that just took so long. And the last thing I want to mention is that screw goes straight into the body to clamp down this bridge saddle right here. And sometimes if you don't use enough force, it doesn't tighten enough. And as you're playing, the tension of the string will actually just pull the saddle closer towards the neck little by little. And that might be like on me, but I didn't want to use a lot of force on this guitar. I don't want to damage it. And so I had to go a little tighter than what felt comfortable, and I eventually got the bridge to stay, but it just took a lot longer to intonate this guitar than with most of my other guitars. And I think the fact that you have to take the string off just to adjust intonation is crazy, because I don't have to do that for any of my other guitars, not even my headless Kiesel. All right, one last thing about this bridge I want to mention is that the height adjustments are these hexes, and these hexes only have one slot going through them. And so if you want to adjust the height, you have to turn that all the way 180 degrees because it only has one slot. You cannot put the string on if that slot is facing the perpendicular direction. It has to be parallel going towards the neck. And that makes fine tuning and fine adjusting of your action really difficult as well. And once again, because the string is on top of it, you have to take the string off completely to adjust it. Really, once you set it up for what you need, this really isn't a problem anymore. It's just something that you have to note going into this guitar if you're planning on re-intonating it or retuning it for something. It is going to take a little bit of time to get this to sit correctly with the tuning that you need and the string gauges that you have. So those are the two kind of big design flaws, in my opinion, of this guitar, despite this guitar completely being about design. I think it got like 80 or 90% of the design correct. It's just those 2 points that I mentioned are just so bad. And I really haven't heard much other people complain about that. I think that the input jack location and the bridge could be updated to something a little bit more usable. But in conclusion, this guitar gets 90% of that design thing that to focus on correct, in my opinion. Maybe none of this deters anyone else in getting this guitar, and that's completely valid. But it is something that I just want to warn people who might not have tried a Strandberg before. Those two things, the output jack location and the bridge on this standard NX, are just in a weird spot, in my opinion. And this guitar could have been so much more livable without those two issues. Especially when my other non-headless guitars that aren't quite as design focused as this Strandberg don't have that issue with the bridge or the output jack. Maybe it's over design, who knows. Those two gripes aside, I think the quality that you're getting with this neck is very, very nice. And just a general feel as you're moving through the fretboard, I'm sure someone who's even more used to multi-scale guitars than me will absolutely love this guitar. I wish, like other Strandbergs I've seen, that they had angled pickups instead of the straight pickups. And really, I think what it boils down to is, are all those things preferable for you? So if you like multi-scale, if you don't think you're going to be messing with the bridge that much, and if the output jack, if you're only standing or playing on your right leg ever, this output jack would never bother you. And so if those fit your criteria, I think this would be a great guitar. A lot of the things I'm talking about definitely could be a preference for me. So let me know in the comments if this is a guitar that sounds like it's right up your alley. Anyway, that's going to do it for me. Hope you enjoyed this video. And if you liked what you saw, please consider hitting subscribe and like, and I will see you on the next one. Later.